everyone. Today I'm going to be talking you through how I make my beautiful cherry pie. So the first thing that I want to say is that when I have time, I like to make my own crust. But I'm a busy working mom of a toddler, so a lot of times I use the Pillsbury pie crusts. They work beautifully and they taste good. They probably have a few additives in there that I don't want to consume all the time, but for special occasions, which is generally when I make pie, that works out well. What I would say is that I would not suggest buying store brand refrigerated pie crusts. I've tried before and a lot of times they come out crumbly and they just don't, you can't work with the crust as well. So I start out by unrolling it and letting it sit for just a couple minutes just so it's not straight from the refrigerator cold. And then I take my rolling pin and I give it just a slight roll just to stretch it out just a little bit. And I want to make sure it's kind of even in terms of the distribution of the dough. So I'm just going to roll that out just a little bit. And then I use a tool that looks like this. And this, I think, was probably originally designed for cutting like ravioli. But I like to use it for cutting my strips for my lattice. So I start and right down the middle. And I like to use the fluted side. You just have to really apply a gentle pressure here because pie crust is so tender it'll cut right through it. And then I generally cut my strips right at a 1/2 inch. And I have this great mat I cut my strips on so that I can kind of eyeball a 1/2 inch as I'm going. The reason I developed this method of making my lattice is because I got really tired of my strips always getting covered in pie filling as I was putting them together. And not all of my strips always come out perfectly, but that's kind of the point of something being homemade, right? It doesn't have to always look exactly perfect. All right, so I've got my strips cut. And what I like to do is start in the middle. So I'm just gonna move a couple of my longest strips out of the way here and just over to the side so that I have some space to start working in. Because I actually start at the center of my crust and then I move out from there. So I just start by making a little X in the middle. And then I work from there. So I'll go to the right first. And then I'll go above. And I alternate where I'm pulling the strips from too so that I keep consistency with the length of my strips. Now I'm gonna go to the left. You can see I'm starting to get close to where I'm working over here. I want to pull this one down just a little bit to make it more even. Fold it back over. And then this time I'm going to go on the bottom. And so I just now can keep working like that as I continue to weave my lattice for my pie crust. And like I said, I try to kind of eyeball this. I don't use a lot of measurements because I like it to look like it's homemade, but still be pretty. You have to be careful with the strips because they will tear. It's happened to me before. So you just have to use care when you're lifting them and try not to stretch them out as you pull on them. You just want to place them rather than kind of maneuver them into place. So I just keep on weaving just like this. Okay, So now that my lattice is constructed, it's time to assemble my pie. And this is where the tricky part of using this method comes into play. What I like to do is I like to go through and just press to make sure that the crust is adhering to itself around the edges, because you're going to be transferring this to the top of your pie. And if it's not sticking together a little bit, you're going to have a lot more difficult time doing this. So, and then I just lightly press on the rest of it just to kind of make it sure it's secure before I try to transfer. Now I've got my other crust already put out in the pie pan I'm using, and I've got my homemade cherry pie filling I'm gonna go on and put in here. You don't want to put the pie filling in the crust too far in advance, because it will make your crust a little bit soggy if you haven't par baked your crust. And I don't like to par bake my crust when I'm making a lattice top pie, because I just feel like it doesn't go together as well. The top crust doesn't adhere to the bottom crust as well as I would like for it to. So there is my cherry pie filling in my bottom crust. And now I'm just gonna gently use my knife to loosen this from my rolling mat. And see, I've already got a place where it's starting to come up. Sometimes I use a spatula for this part. Just depends on what kitchen tools you have easily available, and kind of playing with this method, what works for you. So as I'm pulling it up, I'm just gonna slide a hand underneath to keep my lattice together as much as possible. Kind of pull out the edges as I go. And once I've got it lifted up, then I can actually lay it right on top of my pie. And I try to start at one edge and lay it down gently so I don't end up with cherry pie filling all over my crust pieces. And then you can just press it in so that it adheres to the sides a little. And once I've done that, now I'm gonna go around and trim off my extra pie crust so that I can make a nice folded crust edge to make this pie look nice and pretty for my dinner tonight. Come back and I'll squeeze a little bit more and kind of fold as I'm going. And my oven is preheated now, and that's going to be really important as well, because like I said, you don't want to leave the filling sitting in the raw pie crust for any longer than you have to. Otherwise, you're going to end up with some soggy crust. And I'm just rolling my edge down here. And now I like to go back and make mine look a little bit nicer than this. So I'm going to go through and I use a little pinch method where I take 2 fingers and I stick my thumb in between, and then I move to the next divot and I just pinch around the edge of my pie. My mom taught me to make this cherry pie because she's been making it for years, and I just think it really gives cherry pie something extra to make your own cherry pie filling. I like mine a little more tart than what I can get in a store-bought cherry pie, so I've always made my own cherry pie filling. The last thing I'm gonna do before I put this in the oven is I'm gonna go over the top of the crust with just a little egg wash. And I use just a little egg yolk and about a tablespoon of water in my egg wash, so it gives the crust a nice shine. And now here you are going to drip some egg in your pie filling, but that's not really going to show after it's done baking. And so I'm going to put this into a 350-degree oven and let it bake until my crust is completely cooked, and then I will be able to let it cool and serve it up at our cookout tonight.